Yeah. I think that would work.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now.
And we are live, guys. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
We're just gonna wait for another 5 minutes.
I think that would work.
Yeah, I'm doing that right.
We'll wait for everyone to join this new YouTube link.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, we just had a small technical glitch, and yes, we have people tuning in. Hey, Andreas, nice to see you here. Thank you for tuning into the new link. Awesome. Part 2, guys. It's part 2. Let's do this. This is going to be awesome.
We're gonna be building Netflix today. Like, how exciting that we'll have like almost a final product done. Excited.
Yeah, today's going to be a whole lot more CSS, so that should be a lot of fun for you guys, just to get a sense of how CSS works.
Did you say you dropped the second YouTube link in the comments of the previous video?
Yes, I did. It should be there in the comments. I try to drop it in the chat, but it says that the chat is closed.
Can you post in the Slack channel as well, because it's not showing up for me? Just so I can update.
Sure thing.
As well.
It's also in the Zoom chat, eh?
Okay. Yeah, nice.
That's right. Awesome, Harjit, were you able to push your code?
Yeah, I'll push my code and everyone can now access it from the GitHub link.
Awesome. So, I mean, like, while we're waiting for people to tune in, do you want to just go through like a summary of what we did last time?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Guys, hold on. All right. So last week we actually started with HTML. Akhil went through all the HTML basics, and then I started off CSS basics from there. We didn't have enough time, so I just blazed through CSS. And what we did in CSS is I introduced the syntax of CSS, so the selector, where you actually select the HTML tag, and then the declaration, which allows you to add CSS properties like color, font size. This allows you to style the HTML page. And then I introduced the different ways we are able to add CSS into HTML. And there are actually 3 ways: inline, internal, and external. Inline is basically you add the CSS directly into the HTML tag. So this is an example where you use a style attribute and add the property inside the style attribute inside the h1 tag. And this will allow you to style that specific tag only. But this is not the best practices, especially because you don't want to mix HTML code with CSS. It really gets messy for large projects. And then we went over internal CSS, and this allows us to add CSS in the same HTML page, but separated from the HTML code. So you have a style tag in the header section of the HTML page, and you put in your CSS code inside that. So this is an example. The style tag will be wrapped inside the header tag, and then the body is basically property. So the body is the selector and color is the property. And we then went through external CSS. External CSS is the one we'll most likely be using. And this allows us to separate the CSS code from the HTML code. It makes it more modular. Since the codes are separate, it's more cleaner, it's easier to understand. You can attach multiple CSS files. And this is probably the best practice out there. And to use the external CSS, you have to link the CSS file to HTML file. For the HTML to identify that there's a CSS file connector, you use the link tag in HTML with the relationship of style sheet. You have the ref, which is basically the reference as CSS. Sorry, can everyone just mute themselves? Yeah. Yeah, cool. So the next thing I went through was multiple style sheets. And this allows, so as I mentioned, you can have multiple external style sheets. And this allows you to have modular code. So for example, if you're creating CSS for a larger screen, you can keep it in one file. And then everything for a mobile or smaller screen, you can have it in a separate CSS file. And this is how an external style sheet becomes modular. And then we were supposed to touch on the Fab icon. Akhil, can we get started? Do we have everyone join in?
So, I mean, we have a couple of people that have tuned in now. And yeah, I guess we can get started. Bogdan is saying that I missed the party in the chat from before the session. Yeah, so Bogdan, you really didn't miss anything today. Today we had like a technical issue, so that was kind of the party bummer. But don't worry, we'll do a small little pre-Zoom, pre-live streaming party next time. I guess let's just get started with the actual stuff now.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna open Netflix in incognito mode over here so that we can access the Netflix landing page. And this is actually the page that we created few days ago. And now, right now, I'm going to go through the Fab icon concept. And the Fab icon is basically that little icon up there that makes the website look more legit. It says Netflix Malawi. We have Netflix Kenya. We can change the countries depending on what country you are in. I'm in Malawi. It will show the title accordingly. So to get that icon up there, we use the Fab icon inside the head section. So you use the same link tag, but now instead of a relationship of a style sheet, we're telling the link tag that we want an icon. It's a Fab icon. And we're gonna give it a source, the reference, which I've already downloaded, and you should have the assets folder as well. So if you look at the folders, there's an assets folder and there's actually a Fab icon.png. So we'll be using that. So let me just close this, and inside the link tag, let me just reduce the size of this. So inside the header, I'm going to create a new link tag, and the relationship is actually not a style sheet, it's an icon. And the href is, I'm going to select the assets again. So the / get the folder assets, and then the Fab icon. I'm going to save this, and I've opened this with live server, so it automatically updated. And there you go. As you can see, the icon appears. So it's that simple. Now, the next thing I'm going to go over is selectors. So there are actually multiple selectors. There's a simple selector, the combinator selectors, the pseudo class selectors. There are quite a few types of selectors. And just to reiterate, a selector allows us to select the HTML tag in the HTML page, right? So there are multiple ways you can do that. In this workshop, we'll be going over simple selectors and maybe a pseudo class selector, but yeah, in our workshops, in our real programs, we go over each and every type of selector in depth. But since we do not have enough time, I'll just go over simple selectors, which is mostly used. So element is the first type of selector, and the element allows us to select HTML elements. So each and every element has a name, right? So let me go back to our code. An element will be h1, h2, and that's what I've been using so far. So h2 is an element, and that's what you call an element selector. And then we have an ID selector. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to style a specific, you don't want to target the element, you can give it an ID. So we use an ID attribute inside the HTML tag, and then in the CSS page, CSS code, you use the hash character followed by the ID name, and then add the CSS code. So I'll give you an example right now. So for example, if I want to style, let me get rid of this background image right now. I don't need that. So we can just see the styling. Okay, perfect. So let's say if I want to style unlimited movies TV shows, and more. So I'm going to go directly to unlimited movies, TV shows, and more. Give it an ID of, I don't know, tests. And inside our styles of CSS, I'm going to add an ID. It's a hash character followed by the ID test. And then you can add whatever CSS code you want. So let's say, let me increase the size of that font. The font size, make it ridiculously big, 100 pixels. That didn't work for some reason. Just hold on, this should be some error somewhere. I didn't save the HTML page actually, yeah. So there you go, so the font size actually increased, and that's the ID selector. The ID selector is usually used for a unique tag, so you cannot reuse it again and again. But to solve that problem, we have classes. So you can give a class to an HTML tag, or you can create a CSS class. So for example, let's say I want the font size to be small. So font small, I can create a class, and to create a class, you use a period character. So a period character followed by the class name, which is font small, and then the CSS code inside that. Since it's font small, I'm going to create a font size of 10 pixels, for example. Now I can reuse this class again and again inside our HTML code using the class attribute. So if I want H3 to have a font size of 10, I'll use the class attribute and add the class font small. This is my favorite. The best part, as you can see, the font size reduced to 10 pixels. The best part of classes is you can have multiple classes. So if you want the, let's say, color to be, font color to be red, let's say red, yeah. Color to be red. You can add multiple classes to the same HTML tag by adding a space in it. So it's font small, I'll add a space in between and change font. I'll just use the font color class. And that changes to red because we defined font color class to be red. Yeah, that's the two selectors, multiple classes. Then we have grouping selectors. So previously we used a single selector. So if you, to select a single element, for example, H1, so we would use H1 and add the CSS code inside that. But what if you want to style both H1, H2, and H3, and you do not want to reuse the CSS code again and again? So you can group the selectors by using the comma separator. So H1, H2, H3 is selecting all these three elements, and then you can define the CSS code in that. Cool. And then we have the universal selector. So this is the last type of mostly used selector, a universal selector, and this basically selects the entire body, so the entire HTML page, and styles it. So for example, if I want, let's say, the font size to be the same for the entire page, so I'll use the universal selector. It's a star character followed by the CSS. So the star character followed by CSS, and let's say font size should be 20 pixels. Now, since this is a universal selector, it selects the entire page and changes the font size to 20 pixels. But as you can see, not everything changed to 20 pixels. And that's because there's other CSS that is overwriting the universal selector, the universal font style. So if I remove these two, this ID, the default font size should be 20 pixels. Cool. Now, the other important thing is CSS comments. And to do CSS comments, what I usually do is I use the shortcut, but you can use the / followed by the star character, and then close it off. Put your comment in there, and then close it off with a star character and the /. But the shortcut is highlight whatever you want to comment, command / or control / in Windows, and that will comment out your code. That's a cool thing about Visual Studio. Cool. Now Akhil's gonna take over and explain the div element in HTML. And once he's explained the div element, we'll be able to style the Netflix page now. Akhil, on to you.
Awesome. Harjot, do you mind just pushing your code? I think you pushed your code earlier, but I don't know. I think it was incomplete or something. Yeah.
I'll do that now.
I'm going to share my screen. Also, please enable screen share.
Yeah. Cool. All right, I've pushed my code.
Awesome. You've pushed your code. I'm just going to pull your code so I can see your changes.
Great.
Awesome. So as you guys can see now, whatever Harjot has done, I actually have access to it. If I just start my live server again, you'll see that whatever changes Harjot has done appear on my dashboard now. So this is awesome. This is great. I have Harjot's code with me now, and we can continue building on top of what we were doing, right? So as we said, guys, we'll be jumping a lot around HTML and CSS, right? And right now, we just want to talk about the div element a little bit, right? So I'm sure if you guys have inspected pages or viewed page sources, one HTML element that you'll always see is a div element, right? So div basically stands for division, right? And it's used to divide your content into sections. Now, it's so important to create a proper structure for your code, right? And create it in sections so that, you know, when you're styling your elements, it's really easy to style them, right? So I think, let me open the original Netflix page that we're trying to build so that I can show you exactly what I mean and why divs are important. So, I mean, straight off the bat, if you're brand new to HTML, CSS, divs might be a little confusing. You might feel like it's redundant. Sometimes you don't need to use them. But as you practice more, as you do more projects, I think at the end of this project, you'll have a good sense of divs. And also when we do the YouTube clone, you'll have a good sense of divs as well. So for example, look at this part, right? So if we want to build this, right? Firstly, we need to have a big outer div. So when I say div, think of it as a section, right? So think of them as substitutes. So we need to first have a bigger outer div, which would entail like, you know, this first top part and then like, you know, this part underneath, right? So we need to have like one outer div that will hold subdiv. So the cool thing about the div element is that it doesn't affect the flow of the document, right? So meaning that it doesn't affect like how elements look on the screen, right? You can just put a div, you can put a div around an image and the image will still look the same. That's basically what I mean, right? So for example, over here, we'll have one bigger outer div that will have like the background image in the background. And then we're going to have like a top div over here, you know, which will be the header div. And then we can have another section underneath, which we could call this like the container div. And then inside the container, we have all these different elements. Like, you know, we have these header elements, we have this other heading element, we have this other heading element. So all these elements can be inside. So the cool thing about divs as well, you can nest them, right? You can have an outer div, you can have inner divs, and you can nest them really nicely, okay? So now, like, in order to implement this, right, let's actually implement exactly how we could make these divs look, right? So firstly, we could have an outer div, right? So first we could have like, you know, a banner wrap div. Oh, okay, guys. So cool thing about VS Code, if you're using VS Code, just know that you have the ability to do something called banner wraps. I mean, like if you want to add like classes directly in your code, right? So for example, if I want to create something like this, a div, right? And the div is going to have like a class of, say, banner wrap, right? That's basically an example of what we can do, right? But there's a shortcut to doing this in Visual Studio Code, which is very convenient, right? So first thing is you got to have you can type div dot banner wrap. Okay, so okay, that's really weird. What I'll do is I'll just say dot banner wrap, and that should create it like that, shortcut. And we can put all these different elements inside this banner wrap, right? And then inside the banner wrap, we have the header, okay? And then underneath the header, we have the actual container. So I can say banner container, yeah. And then inside the header, we actually have the sign in button. So I'm just gonna add the sign in button. And then we can also have like, a section for the logo. You could create a div, or we could just directly add an image. And inside the banner container, we can add all these different elements, right? So H1, H2, and so on, yeah. And you can see that's an example of how we can section out our code, right? So, what's the point, right? So like, I'm sure a lot of you might be wondering like, why the hell are we doing divs? Why are we doing this, right? What's the point of it? So for example, we created a header div over here, okay? Now, if I save this code and if we run it, you'll see that it looks really similar, like not much has changed, yeah. But ideally, if we have a logo, right, and we have the sign in button, we want them to appear in one line, okay? So the best way to do that, right, would be to style this header logo, header class, right? So you know how Harjot was adding styles in our styles.css? Essentially, we can basically add styles for the header, so that we can make the logo and the image appear in one line, so that's the convenient thing about using divs. It helps you structure your elements properly. So if you have many elements, if you use divs, you can organize the elements inside a div using the class of the outer div, right? So for example, if we want to structure all these elements in the banner container, we want them to appear at the center of the page, right? We want all these things to appear at the center of the page. That's when we'll basically use something called Flexbox. But then the only way to do that would be to style the outer div, right? So that's why divs are extremely important. If you're struggling to wrap your mind around this, please don't stress about it, because it comes with practice. This really comes with practice. As you do more and more classes and more divs, this will make a whole lot more sense. Yeah. So that's pretty much it with divs. And we can continue. So I guess, Harjot, I'm just gonna hand over to you now to actually style this area. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do this, guys. Before I start styling, I actually want to go through a few more CSS concepts. We just not going to start styling right away. So let's just wait for a bit. So cool. So Akhil went through the div area and created like part of the layout of it. And we went through the various CSS selection properties, right? But I actually didn't start going through the various CSS properties. And these are some of the examples of those CSS properties. There's like color, background, margin, padding, border. There are various of CSS properties. And you can only remember all of this with practice. You won't remember them immediately. So as you practice, you'll get used to it, but it's very easy to remember. So it's like, if you want to change the background color, it's background. If you want to add a border, use border. If you want to add a margin, it's margin, So I'm going to give you an example of fonts. We used, so the font right now is default. So HTML actually has its own default fonts. It's not that great, and Netflix has a much better font. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go. So I've already got the font downloaded. So you can actually download custom fonts and use it in CSS. So if you go to fonts.google.com, you can search for the font you want, select the styles you want, and then you can import it into slides. So I'm just gonna drop a link on the chat. So Akhil, do you wanna just drop this on YouTube?
Yeah, sure. Just drop it in the Zoom chat.
So I've already selected the styles I want that look familiar to the Netflix font. So Netflix doesn't provide their font. It's not open source. It's called Netflix Sans, and we tested that out by using the inspect elements. We went to computed and scroll down here. We see the font family is Netflix Sans. This wasn't available open source, so we had to use an open source version, which is called Open Sans. I've already downloaded it. The link is in the chat. We're just gonna paste it directly inside CSS. It's that easy to import the font. So when you paste the link, you basically importing from the URL, and the URL is providing you the various fonts. So if you notice the URL, it has like different weight sizes. So the font weight of 400, 600, 700 is available, 800 is available, and the font family is actually Open Sans. We got this from Google. So Google is helpful in terms of that. And now what I'm going to do is I want the font family to change for the entire body. So I'm going to use the universal selector and change the font family. CSS has a property called font family. And inside font family, I want it to be Open Sans. You can copy this from Google as well, the Google Fonts page. But I'm just going to type it out. So, and it's a sans serif font. And if you notice, the font on our page changed. How great is that? Cool. Now, the next thing I want to speak about is Akhil created divs over here. So we're just going to go back to our code. I'm going to expand the HTML page over here, and he created some divs. I actually don't have his code, so let me just get his code. Akhil, did you push your code?
Yeah, I'm just going to push it right now. Awesome.
Okay. So Akhil's just going to push the code, so I'll get the divs over here. But what I'm going to do is, yeah, let's just wait for him. In the meantime, let's just play around with some more font, some more CSS properties. So there's CSS properties like width and height. You can assign heights and width to the property. And just in case you don't remember a property, you can literally Google it. So if you type CSS background and just Google it, the first thing that comes is in W3 Schools. You open W3 Schools. It's a really helpful tool. It tells you the various properties, how you can actually add a CSS property. So guys, Google is your best friend whenever you're stuck. So make sure you use the best out of it. For example, background has like background color, opacity, has various things, like various properties within it. But the cool thing is it also has a shortcut. You can literally just use the background keyword, and you can add the image, the position to that background. But we'll go over it in a bit when we actually styling the Netflix background. Akhil, so have you pushed the code?
Yeah, Harjot, I've just pushed the code. But I think before you cover backgrounds, right? Just hand over to me, because I'd like to also just cover 2 more things in HTML. The input element, sorry, 3 more things. So forms, input, and the button element.
Cool. Let me just finish this off. I'm just gonna get full origin master, and I should have Akhil's code now. Yeah? Yeah, awesome. So Akhil created a div banner. He created a header inside it, then a banner container, and yeah, and the div class logo. So what I'm gonna do is, if you go back to the code, to our HTML page, you can't really see the code, right? Like the divs, you can't really see the structure. So I'm actually gonna style the logo div inside our styles.css. So I'm gonna remove all this code over here, all these classes and everything, and I'm gonna style the logo div, logo class. So dot logo, and I'll give it a height of, let's say, 40 pixels, a width of 40 pixels. Okay. But we still won't be able to see any difference over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a background color of black. And as you can see, a 40 by 40 pixel box was created, and that's basically the div class logo. Let me increase it a bit so that it's much more clearer. So I'll make it like 100 and 100. And that's 100 by 100 div. Let's inspect and see what properties it actually has. So I'm going to go to the computer tab. And if you notice that it's 100 by 100 box, a div, and then it has padding outside it, then it has a border outside it, and then it has a margin. So these are the various properties that a div usually has. Let's add some margin, and let's continue adding some more properties to the logo class. I'll add a margin of 20 pixels. So just notice the size. Look at the size. The size is currently 100 by 100. There's no margin. There's no padding. And look at the difference after I add margin. The space around the box increased. If I add more, it increases further. So that is basically margin. Now let's add padding. I'll make it 20 pixels and save. Whoa, that was supposed to be a 100 by 100 pixel div, right? 100 by 100 pixel square. But now after adding padding, the square size actually increased, which we usually don't want it to happen, right? If we say we need a height of 100 by and a width of 100, it should actually be 100, a true 100 pixel and a true width of 100 pixel. Now, if I add a border of, let's say, border of 10 pixels of color red, and that's it. That didn't show up. Akhil, am I missing anything? Solid, it has to be solid.
Solid. So you have options. You can make it like dashed. You can make it solid.
Yeah, the various different options. Dashed, that will create a dashed.
But most frequently, like normally, like you'll never use any other option. Solid is what you're going to use in most of your projects.
Absolutely. But if you notice now, the square is actually much bigger than 100 pixels. And if I inspect this, it says it's 100 pixels, but that's incorrect. This is happening because it's also including the padding, it's also including the border, and that's not supposed to be happening. That's where the concept of box sizing comes in. So box sizing is a property in CSS, and it allows us to add padding and border inside the element's total width and height. So right now, this div does not have the box sizing property. I'll show you after I add it, but this div does not have the box sizing property. The size of the div increased, which we usually don't want. If you say it's 100 pixel width, it has to be 100 pixel width. The padding, margin, border should not affect it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I want it to apply to the entire HTML page. So I'll go to the universal indicator and create a box sizing property that's available on CSS, and it should be border box. And look at the difference now. I'm going to save, and yay, it's back on 100 by 100 pixel. That's the true width and height of a div of the square. That's what we actually said. It has to be 100 by 100. So that's where box sizing border box property comes in help. Hope that was clear. Now, Akhil, I'll just hand over to you before I jump into CSS backgrounds.
Awesome, dude. Just push your code as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think box sizing for me was one of the most mind-blowing things because it actually shrinks the height and width of the element based on whatever padding and stuff that you add. So I think it's really, really powerful. Normally in all your projects, that is something that's going to be a constant. Like you're going to want to make your elements border box sizing. Okay. Harjot, have you pushed the code?
Yeah. Just a minute. It's a minute before you pull. Yeah, I pushed it now.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Before we continue styling the application, I just wanted to cover a few things, right? So the first thing is the form element, right? So normally, like whenever you create any website, correct, you'll always need some sort of way to collect data and send it to some sort of server, right? So for example, a login page or a sign-in page, you might have to enter your email address, you might have to enter your password, and then only then you can log into the system, right? So the best way to collect user input is using the HTML5 form element, right? So user input is often sent to the server for processing once you use this form element, okay? And the HTML form element is used to create an HTML form, okay? And this is what the form would look like. So you have the form, and then inside the form, you have different form elements, okay? So how is this useful and relevant for our Netflix project right now? Give me a sec. There we go. That was really weird. Yeah. So basically, what we need is we need some sort of way to create a form in this. Like we need a form in this particular project, right? Because here we're taking in this input, this email address, and then when we click on get started, right, the details actually have to get sent to some sort of server for processing, right? So that's where a form becomes extremely useful. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and create a form and see what that would look like. So what I'll do is inside our banner container, right, we have this h1, h2, and then we have this h3, right? I'm just going to make this slightly smaller so we can get some more real estate. And inside over here, I'm just going to create a form, okay? The form tag, and then you can see that you have an option here called action. So its action is basically to trigger some sort of action. We can put a link to a function over here so that when you click on submit, right? So submit would mean like, when we click on get started here, like, when we submit the form, right? It'll trigger that function. So that's where action would be useful. But then we really don't need that for now. So I'm just going to remove that because we can manually add a function using JavaScript on a particular element. Inside this form element is where we're going to also add all our different elements, right? So our different elements would be some sort of way to take in input and then a button, right? So now what would this actually look like in our project, right? So let's talk about the input element. Okay, so the input element is mostly used under forms. So it's within forms, you're normally going to find inputs, right? So like login input, so you enter your email address, password input, so you can enter your password and so on, right? So it's normally used to take in text. And there's also different options of inputs that you can take from a user. So there's text, which we'll be using over here. There's actually email. I think email would be more relevant for this project. And then we also have button. We can actually directly use the button as an input and it'll look like a button, right? And then we have checkbox, we have radios, we have the submit button. So there's quite a few ways we can use the input element. Right now, we'll just focus on email. I think that's what's most relevant. So we basically need some sort of way to add this input, right? So what I'll do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say input. Yeah, and you see Visual Studio Code makes it an input of type text by default, right? But instead, I want to make it email because I only want users to enter emails, okay? It does some sort of validation for us, right? And then if I save that, and you can see that this is also self-closing, similar to the image tag. If we come over here, just waiting for it to load, you can see that we have input over here, right? We have the input tag, and then over here now we can type some sort of input, right? So that's that. But then you can see that there's a little like email address over here that appears, So what we can do is we can add something called a placeholder for inputs, right? So what I'll do is in our file, I'm just going to create a new attribute. So luckily for us, the input element has a placeholder attribute, which allows us to add an attribute. So I'm going to say email address, okay? And if we go back and check it out, we should see a placeholder that says email address now, okay? So the reason why all the font looks the same right now is because we've added this over here and we haven't actually styled the H1, H2 elements, which we'll do shortly, okay? So don't worry about that. The font sizes and stuff, we'll work on it. And then the next element is actually a button, correct? So we have an input over here and then we have some sort of button that appears on the right-hand side over here. So similar to the input tag, we also have the button element, okay? So the button element basically defines a clickable button. So when you click on the button, you can trigger some sort of action, okay? So that's basically where the button comes in. What I'll do is I'm going, and there's also a little note here says that inside a button element, you can put text tags. So you can make text bold, you can make it italic, and so on, which is something you cannot do inside the input element, which is a button. So remember, there's two ways we can create the button. We can create a button using the input tag, or we can create a button using the button tag, right? So normally in my experience, I've rarely used input to create a button. Input is like to take in inputs and use the button element to actually create a button. So what I'll do is I'll also create a button element here, okay? So button, right? And then the button is just going to say get started with a little arrow kind of icon. And if we check that out, we should see it appear over here. So now the elements are appearing and this is done, okay? Great. So other than that, there's just one other thing I want to do. So if you look at this div over here, right? If I just inspect this, so that's one of the cool things of using Chrome. You get to see like, you know, what people have done, like what businesses have actually done with their code. So I just clicked on inspect there, and you can see what these guys have done is they've created a form element and they've put H3 inside the form, and then they've created the email stuff inside another div there. So what I'll do is inside similarly, what I'll do is I'm going to create a get started div, yeah, and then inside the get started div, I'm just going to put the H3 element, and then under the H3 element, I'm just going to put the form. So I'm just structuring it in a manner that will allow us to style it easily. The cool thing about HTML CSS, if you feel like the structure is not working out for you, you can immediately change it, okay? Great, so Harsha, that's pretty much it from my side. Now we can continue styling the background and make this thing materialize further.
We're going to be doing fun stuff.
Yeah, let's do the real stuff.
Okay.
I'm just going to push the code.
Cool. So yeah, so just question break. I know there was a question regarding responsive CSS. Someone wanted me to go over responsive CSS. So I'm just going to go over it again. So what I mentioned earlier was you can have multiple style sheets. So over here, as you can see, there are actually two style sheets linked. There's the responsive CSS and styles of CSS. I'm using the styles of CSS currently. I'm not using the responsive of CSS. I should actually remove this because I'll be coding, I'll be overriding it. So the responsive of CSS basically allows us to add, you can have as many CSS files you want. I can have like 10 CSS files, doesn't really matter. It just allows you to make your CSS code more modular. So for example, responsive.css can have all CSS code for a small screen. A styles.css file can have code for a medium-sized screen. You can have a lg.css font file for larger screens, you know. So this basically allows us to have CSS code in multiple files, and I think that's what that's the explanation you wanted. Hopefully that answered your question.
Harjot, do you mind just going over the font, like how we got the Open Sans font in the project? Because I think someone's struggling with it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the slide, and I mentioned that we should go to fonts.google.com. Akhil, do you mind just putting this on the chat? I'm going to open this up. Inside fonts.google.com, we should search for the font that we want, select the styles, then import it into our, not slides, import it to our code. And you add the font family. So my Google font has opened. I'm actually looking for a font called Open Sans. I've already researched on this. So that's why I know I need this font type, because Netflix Sans and Open Sans are very similar. And as you can see, it allows me to select the various styles. So let's say I want the regular style, I want semi-bold, I want bold, extra
That's
bold
good.
maybe,
Yeah.
italic, and that's all I need, right? So I can either download the font file or I can embed it. So when you click on embed, you get that link directly. So you can get that.
There's also import. Click on import up there, like right next
Yeah.
to link.
So link allows us to add it directly into the HTML file, and at import allows us to add it inside CSS. And this is what I use. So you take this, copy it, and paste it into your CSS code, which I've already done. So that is basically Google Fonts. Yeah.
I've pasted that link in the chat as well, so you guys can check it out. The font that we're using,
Cool.
the embed link.
Yeah. So if there are any other questions, just drop it in the chat and we'll be answering. In the meantime, I'll jump into the next concept. I think this is the final concept that is really required for us to actually create the Netflix landing page. And it's called CSS Flexbox. So Akhil created the divs inside our landing page, our HTML page. But how do you really structure it? How do you give it a layout? How do you know that you want one div to be next to another div, and then the third div has to be underneath it, because you need a structure. Netflix has that structure over here. Netflix has that one massive div up there, and inside that div, it has like two different divs, the Netflix logo, the sign-in button, then you have another row which contains the unlimited movies, TV shows. So how do you really structure it? And for that, we use the CSS property Flexbox. It's actually a layout module, and I feel like it's the easiest layout module out there. There are other layout modules like position, grids, but I personally prefer Flexbox. And using Flexbox itself has multiple properties like flex direction, flex wrap, flex flow, justify content, align items. I'll go over them now. I'll be going over flex direction, justify content, and align items. I think that's the most important ones. Flex wrap maybe. Yeah, when we need it, we'll use it. So the first one is flex direction. To define Flexbox, the first step is to use the display property in CSS and change it to flex. And in this way, you can use all the Flexbox properties. So inside your class, use a display property, change it to flex, and this will change your div to a Flexbox. And now since it's now a Flexbox, you can use the various Flexbox properties. The first one is flex direction. And flex direction basically defines the direction in which the div container wants to stack the item. So you can have a row, you can have a column, you can have column reverse. It basically reverses the column. It starts from 3 to 1 instead of 1 to 3. So 1, 2, 3 is these are basically items inside that div. So you can reverse it. You can do the same thing with row reverse as well. And this is basically telling the div which direction the items should be laid out in. And the next one is justify content. Now that you've figured out which layout we need, either a row or column, that's what we usually use. I'm not sure when we use column reverse, row reverse. The next thing is to align it. So justify content is used to align the items. So flex start will push all the items to the beginning, center will center align everything, flex end will push it towards the end, space around will make equal spaces between the items, and space between pushes all the items to the ends and creates the equal space between. And this justify content works horizontally, whereas align items works vertically. So the items also need to be aligned vertically. It's basically the opposite direction. Sometimes justify content works vertically as well. So align items would be the opposite direction, and it does literally the same thing as justify content, but the opposite direction. Then we have flex wrap. So sometimes what happens is you can have a div. So let me go back to my landing page here, Netflix landing page. Sometimes you can have a div overflowing from the page. So maybe you have like 10 items, 10 different divs in a row. It might overflow out of the HTML landing page, and that's not what you want, right? So maybe, so if we have this, these are two separate divs. I'm going to resize this. And as you can see, it's actually resizing and it's not overflowing, because if it was stuck to the same size, it would now go out of the HTML page. But now as I reduce it, it's getting smaller and smaller, but there's a limit to it, and it falls to the next line. That's flex wrap. It allows the items that are overflowing go to the next line. Cool. Now that we have all the concepts, we understand all the concepts, or we've actually seen them at least, let's actually go and style our landing page. Akhil, have you pushed your latest code? Is there anything I need from your code?
Yeah, just
I'm
cool.
Okay,
Yeah, you,
cool.
you do need the forms and the buttons and stuff.
Okay, cool. Right. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the logo class. This was only for testing. I'm going to remove any styling, any default styling, reduce the size of this part here so that we have more working space. Awesome. So let's analyze what we have in the Netflix landing page first. We have the top div. It has a logo on the left, sign in button on the right. We have the text at the center, watch anywhere, smaller text, even smaller text, form item, get started. Then we have the background, right? Akhil has created a main div called banner wrap. Banner wrap is basically the entire banner, the top part, this entire banner wrap. That's why he created that div. This will be a separate section, and we'll create divs for that. So divs, as you can see, divs allows us to create sections. Now the banner wrap actually has a background in it. It has that image. So let's start off by adding that image to our banner wrap. So it's the class banner wrap. So dot banner wrap, and I'm going to add a background. So I'll call it background, and I'll use the URL. So CSS allows us to pick, actually, it's URL. Yeah, URL basically allows us to reference the image. The image is inside our assets folder. So I'm going to use / inside assets is BG image. Cool. I'm going to save that. Let's see what's happening. So we've got that image in our landing page, but that's not looking really good. You see, it's only covering the height of that container, the banner wrap container, which means we need to specify the height of banner wrap. There's some sort of margin padding on the div. So divs or some elements usually have their own margin and padding. We don't really want that. We want to style it ourselves. So what I'm going to do is inside the universal selector, I want the margin and padding for all the divs, all the elements to be 0. So I'm going to change margin to 0 and padding to 0. And awesome. That removes the margin and padding. Next thing is we need to give the banner wrap a height and a width. So let's just analyze the Netflix landing page. I'm going to right click, inspect. Let's see if we can get the height of that entire image. it's actually fixed. They've actually put a fixed height, but we don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to estimate. It's about 80% of the screen size. So what I'll do is inside banner wrap, I'll give it a height of 80 VH. Okay. And 80, why I chose 80 VH is I want the height, view height is basically the height of the screen, and 80 is basically 80% of it, 80 view height. And as you can see, the size of the image increased, the height of the image increased. But it's not really center aligned. There's some distortion. So we have to reposition this. And to reposition this, I want it to be centered aligned. So background, there's a property called background position. Should be centered. And then I want the background size to be cover. So cover basically, so there's a property called background size, and background size allows us to take over the entire, it allows us to fill the entire div. So you won't see much change, but it's critical when you want to resize the image. You want to resize the window. So background, it's called background, what is it called? Background size, yeah. So as you can see, there's so many properties, you can forget them sometimes. But with practice, you get used to it. So background size will be cover. Awesome. Nothing much changed. The distortion has improved. Cool. And that's basically our background. Now, the next thing we should be working on is, let's work on the header now. Akhil, what do you say?
Yeah, go for the header, dude. We need to also add the Netflix logo here. Yeah.
Yeah, the Navbar. So inside this, so in the logo class,
rename it to Navbar. Navbar makes sense. Nav dashbar.
Navbar, yeah, Navbar. That makes more sense. So inside the logo HTML tag, I'll create the image tag. The source is basically /. Inside assets, I want the logo.png. And we don't have to put any ALT text in it. So let's see if the image pulls through. Okay, pulls through, it's massive. We don't want it to be that big. The sign in button is somewhere here. As you can see, that's the sign in button. It has some sort of default styling because it's a link tag. To remove that, you can use a property called text decoration. So text decoration, and you can set it to none. Put it inside a universal indicator so that all the A tags get rid of the underline underneath it. So when I save, the underline goes away. Awesome. Now, I want the Netflix logo to be a bit smaller, right? Yeah. So the size over here, I'm going to use the screenshot tool. This will allow me to check how many pixels the Netflix logo is actually. So it's about 38, 40 pixels. That's really small, eh? Let's see. So inside banner wrap, I'm going to go to the navbar, so .navbar. I'm going to start the navbar class, and inside the navbar class is the logo class. And inside the logo class is the image element. And I'm going to style the image element. I'm going to give it a height. 40 pixels seems very small. I'm going to make it about 50 pixels. Cool.
I think it's a bit big, huh? 50 pixels.
It's big. Yeah, I think let's go back to 40. Yeah, looks much like it.
A bit smaller.
A bit smaller?
Yeah, go with like 30, 38 maybe.
Right. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah?
So guys, like if you want to know the exact value of how big the image is, we can actually just check what Netflix did. But that's just, it takes a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, right click, inspect, and you can see the height. It's 36 pixels actually.
Yeah,
And
might as well.
yeah, might as well change that to 36 pixels. I think it's going to be very small. Not really.
Yeah, I think 36
Okay.
is good.
One. Now, if we go and notice the sign button is somewhere underneath it. So what I'm going to do is let's change the layout. Let's give it a layout now. So remember we went over Flexbox. Let's actually change the Navbar div to be a Flexbox so that I can align the items. So .navbar and .navbar should be display flex. That creates a Flexbox. And the moment I created a Flexbox, if you notice, the sign-in button went to the right of the Netflix landing page, which means the flex direction is now a row. So by default, flex direction is row. So we don't have to play around with that now. Now the next thing is I want the sign-in button to be on the right. So what I'll do is I'll change, let's go back to our properties, and we're gonna use justify content, and we go for space between so that the logo is basically item 1 and the sign-in button is item 3. So justify content, I'm going to say space between and save. And awesome, the sign-in button goes right to the end, but we still have an issue. The space around it, the borders, it's basically called the padding or the margin. Netflix has that space, so we have to create that. And we can inspect what the padding is of this by right-clicking on the position and click on inspect, highlight the div, and if you notice, the div actually has a height of 4 rem. Rem is another way of giving it's equivalent to some pixels. So 1 rem is equivalent to the size of the default font, the default font size. So the font size currently is 20 pixels. That's the default font size, right? So 1 rem is basically 20 pixels.
And
but
normally,
I wanted,
guys, if you don't specify your default font size, it's by default I think it's about 16 pixels. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna change it to 16 pixels because I'm sure that's what Netflix uses. And then I'm gonna give the navbar a height of 4 rem. I'm just gonna literally copy the styles that Netflix is using. Go to computer, see what it has a margin of 56 left and right. I'm gonna add a margin of 56. Margin top and bottom, I want it to be 0. Left and right, I want it to be 56 pixels. So that's a shortcut. So if you have two values inside the margin property, the first value is the top margin and bottom margin, and the second value is the left and right margin. And awesome, that pushes it to the right. That creates the space in between, but we still have some padding on top. Let's see what the padding is.
I think check the above element maybe.
Yeah. So it's the wrapper. Right? It has a padding of about 20 pixels top. So I'm going to create a padding of 20 pixels. Top. So you can define padding top itself. It's a property, so 20 pixels. And that pushes it down. Awesome. So that's our logo is well positioned. Our sign button is well positioned as well. Now, what I'm going to do is let's style the sign-in button to look more like a sign-in button. Because right now it's just a link, you see? So I'm going to push this down a bit so we can see both the screens. So we have the sign-in button, that sign-in button. And let's see what div we're working on. It's literally just an A tag. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a class of button, btn. Cool. And I'm going to style that button. So .btn, and what I'll do is I'll give it a background color. and I'll just say red. It's not actually red. We can check that by using a cool tool that Chrome has. So when you click inspect, right click inspect on it, it will directly give you the background color. If the background color is not available, what you can do is click anywhere, click on element.style, type the color property inside the console here, and select any color and press enter. And then when you go over that color and click on that color, the blue color, a color picker comes through. And now you can go over any part on the page and select the color. I want that red color. So I'm going to go over the red button, select that, and there you go. The color appears. It's E50914. And it's E50914. That's what Netflix actually mentioned. So I'm going to pick that up, add a background color, and let's see. It also has some sort of height. I'm just going to remove this. Yeah. So it has a padding of 7 pixels, 17 pixels, font weight of 400. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to literally just copy this entire properties. You can do that. And paste it inside the button. So we have a padding of 7 pixels, top and bottom, left and right 17 pixels, font weight of 400, font size of 1 rem. I'm going to save. Let's see what we have. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So we have that button coming up. Sign doesn't look that good. It's blue. So
I think try to align items like for Navbar. Try to align items center so that vertically all items are aligned center. I think that makes a difference.
Okay,
Try that.
cool. I'll do that. I'm just going to change the color to white first. I'm just on in between that. Navbar align items center. Okay, great. That worked.
So cool. What tends to happen is by default, your align items, think of your align items as like the vertical alignment. So like vertically how you want them to be aligned. Align items by default is called stretch. Stretch means it just fills whatever space is there. So when we say center, we're compressing it and we're saying that, no, we want all elements to be in the center.
Yeah. The button, the Netflix button actually has some sort of like it's rounded.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll go to button and I'm going to say border radius. Border radius is basically the corners. It allows us to add some border radius, and I'll say about 3 pixels. We can check what Netflix is using. Go to the computer tab and see border bottom left radius 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 3 pixels. It was about 3 pixels, so that was a good guess, and that creates our button, much like Netflix. Awesome. So we are done with the menu bar, the nav bar of Netflix. This is how the Netflix nav bar looks like. Now we can jump onto the next concept, the next section, which is the main section here, the text inside it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go analyze, see what Akhil's done. So he created something called banner container. And inside banner container, I'm going to remove this ID. Not needed now. We have the h1 tag, h2. We have a div of get started. Let's style each one of them right now. So inside the banner container, so I'm going to create a banner container class. Let's make it a flex first so that we can center align it. So display flex. And the moment I did display flex, the default is row. So that's why everything changed to row. You can't really see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color to white. And everything becomes a row now. How do we solve that? And to solve that, what we're going to do is we'll change the flex direction. That's one of the properties we went through. So flex direction column. And this pushes everything to its own line. How great is that? Now I want this to be center aligned somewhere in the center here. So to center align it, you can use justify content center, align item center, and this will center align the items. but it's actually centered aligned right on top. And why that is actually happening is we haven't really specified the height of this container, eh? This banner container doesn't have a height. How will it know that it has a center line somewhere down here? That the height of this container is that big, you know, it's the entire page. We haven't specified. So I'm going to right click inspect to just show you. So banner container is that height. So it has actually done its job. It has centered aligned vertically and horizontally. It's just that we haven't specified the height. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the height to banner container. But what we initially did was we gave a height of, where is it gone? So banner wrap is 80 VH. The navbar has a height of 4 REM.
Yeah.
Right? We need to remove 4 REM from this height so that it doesn't overflow, because we want the navbar plus the banner container to add up to 100%. And I want it to fill the banner wrap height, which is 80 VH. So what I'm going to use a calc function inside CSS. So that's a cool thing. You can calculate inside CSS. I'm going to subtract 100% minus 4 REM. That's the best part. You can subtract two different, so you can subtract pixels from REM, percentage from REM. So you can subtract two different metrics from in CSS.
So guys, I just wanna give a pointer here, right? So you know, Harjot specified the height of the banner wrap to 80 VH, right? And now since banner container is an inner div, so it's like a child of banner wrap, which is the parent. When we say 100%, right, we're basically saying that fill the height of the parent container. So the parent container is 80 VH, and inside the parent container, we have banner container. And if we say banner container, I want to give it a height of 100%, right? Minus 4 REM. It's gonna use the 80 VH. So the 100% is going to be equal to 80 VH. I just wanted to make that pointer. Yeah.
Can I say 80 VH here? Will it be the same?
Yeah, it's the exact same thing, but 100% is a relative sizing. So 100%, the relative sizing is done to the parent elements. So that's basically the point I wanted to get across.
Okay, cool. Now that this is center aligned, I know we only have about 9 minutes. Am I correct?
Yeah. Let's get the fonts done at least.
Yeah, let's get the fonts done so it looks more like Netflix. So I'm going to inspect the first font, which is Unlimited Movies. I'm going to inspect that. And inside that, the font is actually, no, that's not the font. The font size is actually 50 pixel, font weight is 700. Have we imported 700 up there? Yes, we have imported 700 font size. So what I'm going to do is the H1 inside banner container should be, let's see, 50 pixels, right? So I'm going to define the font size property to 50 pixels and save. And awesome. So Unlimited Movies TV show is now 50 pixels, but it's on a straight line. A quick hack is going to be, I'm going to put a BR tag. So BR is basically a line break after the TV. So you can put it inside H1. So it's BR, and that's it, and save. That's basically a line break, and it pushes it to the next line. But as you can see, it's not centered align. So to center align text, we can use a property called text align. Text align basically center aligns the text. And let's see. Awesome, that center aligns the text. Now, the next one is actually H2. So let's do the same thing for H2. It has a font size of 26 pixels, font weight of 400. So I'll do the same thing, dot banner wrap H2 font size of 26 pixels, font weight of 400. And let's see if that works. It's actually much bigger, eh? The font weight is a bit too much. Make it about 300.
Yeah.
Doesn't look.
I think Netflix Sans is slightly different from Open Sans.
Slightly different. 26 looks much bigger as well. Right? 24. Let's see. Yeah, somewhere around that.
I mean, if we
Maybe.
add some line height.
Yeah,
I
let's
think-
add some padding. So I'm just gonna see because it has more space in between here. So to see how much the space is, I'm just gonna highlight H2 tag inside Netflix. Go to compute it and see the padding. It has a margin of top and bottom 16 pixels, and left and right of 155 pixels. Wow, that's big. So margin. Top and bottom 16 pixels, left and right of 155 pixels, and let's see. Well, okay, that worked, but that really reduced the size of the font. I think the left and right are required.
You added a space after 24. Maybe that's the reason why it looks so small.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Much like it. Yeah. Now the next thing I'm going to work on is the next one, H3. I'm going to do the same thing. Right click, inspect, get the font size of 19.2 pixels. So that's dot. Let's see what Akhil's done here. It's actually inside the form elements. Is it? No, it's inside get started.
Yeah.
What I'll do is dot get started. It's the H3 tag, and font size should be 19.2 pixels. Yeah, cool. That worked.
Weight. Yeah.
Weight should be about 300 as well.
Yeah. Also, bro, for H1, make the font weight 700 pixels.
700, correct. I think it's the same. 700 might be a bit too much. Reduce it to about 600 because Open Sans is a bit heavy.
Let's see.
See, this is 600, and look at that, it's a bit thinner. Maybe if we add the overlay effect, maybe that could help.
Yeah.
But we have one more concept for that. Am I right? It's the position concept.
Yeah. So there's position, there's Z index, there's pseudo selectors. There's actually quite a lot you need to know before we do the overlay.
Right. So I have 4 more minutes. Let me just go over the form itself. Let's style the form. So we have this the input email address, get started. Let's see the div tag, the form tag over here. It's an input and button. So what I'll do is I'm going to remove all the styling from the form tag, right? So it's inside banner container, form is an element, so I don't have to put a dot. And I'm going to remove all the borders from inside to none. I don't want any default styling. I'll change the display to flex so that I can align it properly. And then I want it to be centered aligned, so justify content center. As you can see, a lot of properties are repeated again and again. So you really just get used to what properties that need to be used. So this basically center aligns everything. And let's see. Perfect. That centered align everything. Now,
Harjot, I mean, before we style the form, right? We have someone who's asking us to go over the sign-in button again. How we styled the sign-in button. So maybe we can just cover form next time.
Yeah, I think we can just cover the form next time. This is coming. Yeah, it's coming out the Netflix landing page. So let me just go over the sign-in button. So what I did for the sign-in button is we actually use an A tag. Let me just close this. We use an A tag in HTML, right? It has its own default styling. So what I did was I first removed the default underlined because a link is always underlined. So I removed that using text decoration none. And then I added a class btn so I can style it. So I'm going to go to the btn class. And what I did was I gave it a background color. And how I got this background color is by going to Netflix and getting that color format. So right click inspect and you'll find the color format. Cool. Then what I did was I literally copied the styling from Netflix. So Netflix actually has some padding around the button. So if I uncheck this, the padding goes away. So it has that padding around it, around the sign-in text, and then it has the font size, font weight. We defined all that, and that's how we got it to align at the right place. I changed the color to white and border radius to 3 pixels because it's a bit rounded. The reason how I got that height and width of it, I'm sure a lot of you might be confused, is how did you actually define a height and width is, I'm using a border box. We defined border box on top. So I don't really have to define the height and width because this padding is basically is inside the height and width of that button. So everything outside the text. So the text is actually 1 rem, which is about 16 pixels. The padding is 7 pixels. So it's 7 pixels on top, 7 pixels on the bottom. If we go to our button and inspect it and check the height, you can see the height is basically the font size and the width is also the font width. Then we gave it a padding, and that's how we came up with the structure of the button. And yeah, that's basically how we came up with the button. The other thing was you have to add align item center to the banner, to the navbar actually, because we want all the content of that navbar to be aligned in the center. And yeah, that's how we got the button. As you can see, it actually works, eh? So when I clicked on it, it took me to the login page of Netflix. Yeah, things working. It's loading. Yeah. All right. We are actually over time right now. Would have covered a bit more if we didn't have the technical difficulties earlier. And are there any questions? Any questions that you may have?
Actually, one of the people is struggling with something. Jake is struggling with the universal selector, I think, in style.css. He says it's not color yellow anymore. Just make sure that you've opened the curly brace and closed it, hey? Because if you don't open it and close it, maybe that might be a reason why you're getting the error.
What's the error?
I'm not sure exactly what the error is, but I don't think it seems to be working. So maybe it must be some syntax error. So just make sure you've closed the brackets and stuff.
Yeah, how you can actually test is remove the margin and padding from the universal selector.
He says that there's a problem. There's a problem with the import statement. So did you add the import statement like Harjot at the top of the file like that? Does it look like that? Is there a closing?
So it has that closing.
Is there a semicolon at the end? Just make sure there's a semicolon. Okay, so is it working now? After you add maybe the semicolon after the import statement, does it look, just check out what the screen is showing right now. Does it look the same? Maybe you missed something like a semicolon or something somewhere.
You need to define font family sans serif, okay? In the universal selector. I mean, I'm going to push this code right now. So what you can do is compare your code with what I've done and see what's the difference, and probably you figure out the error.
So Giovanni is asking if we can go through the H1 again, the CSS and the HTML.
All right. Okay, cool.
Oh, Jake, don't worry about the coloring here because we've used like both of Harjot and I are using a different theme. So it might look slightly different from your colors. So don't worry about the coloring. Like we could have totally different colors, but it still works.
Okay, I've pushed my code, so you can now get the updated code. So I'll just go over. So we're supposed to go over H1, right? H1 styling. So what we did was, so this is actually an H1 tag inside HTML. So an H1 tag is basically means it's header 1. That's what it stands for. It's header 1. This is header 2. And it allows us to add text inside it. So there's a P tag, that's a paragraph, H1 is a header. And we use the H1 tag over here. And inside the H1 tag, we added the text unlimited movies, TV shows, and more. But if you notice the Netflix landing page, the shows and more goes to the next line. So we need like a line break after TV. So to add a line break, you use the BR tag. It doesn't have any closing tag. You just type BR, and that will create a line break. Now that you've created the HTML tag, we have to style it. H1 has its own styling, like in HTML. It has its own default styling, its own default font, so we need to restyle to our needs. So what I did was I went to Netflix, right-clicked on unlimited movies, inspected it, and that's how I found the font size to be 3.125 REM. Or when you go to computer, you can get the pixels value, which is about 50 pixels and a font weight of 700, right? So we want our H1 to be 50 pixels in font size and 700 pixels in font weight. So I went to my styles.css. That's where we have all our CSS code. And our H1 tag is actually inside banner container. So I only want all the H1s inside banner container to be affected. We might use H1 again some way in the next section. I don't want it to be mixed. So I defined our class banner wrap. Inside banner wrap, there's an H1 element, and I want the font size to be 50 pixels, text align to be centered, and font weight to be 600. When you save
So, I mean,
this,
I just want to clarify that the H1 tag is actually inside banner container, but banner container is inside banner wrap. So what this selector does it targets banner wrap, and then it looks for any H1 tag inside of banner wrap, and then finds it inside banner container. So it works fine.
Yeah. So if I have this H1 outside banner container, it will still give me the same styling because it's inside banner wrap.
Okay, guys. Yeah, so thank you so much, guys. I know we're a little over time. And yeah, we won't be going through any new material, but we're happy to stick around for like 2 or 3 minutes to take any more questions. And yeah, I guess you know, DSC leads will send you an email or something again so that you guys can check out, you know, give us feedback and stuff. And yeah, like we're pretty much done with today's material. Awesome.
Yeah, the Netflix page is actually coming out, right? Like you can see the navbar is up there. We're getting the fonts in there. If we had maybe a few more, like maybe another hour or so, we could have probably
so
the section of it.
Giovanni is actually wondering why the H1 is still red. So just check out, maybe you still have a great or a legend. Solve the issue. Awesome. Great stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, guys. So as you can see, the Netflix landing page is coming out. It's still messy, but we've got enough concepts to actually style our page now. There are a few more advanced concepts that we'll be going over in the next workshop. Things like position, Z-index, how do you add an overlay? Netflix has an overlay, a nice overlay on top of the picture. We'll add that overlay. Then we'll go over this video. How do you add a video? How do you position it? You know, the video is actually inside. So this TV is actually a different image. So if you notice, I'm picking up the TV right now, and then we have that video on top. So that's a whole different concept. Then we'll be going over the footer. How exactly do you align the footer like this in our next workshop?
Brilliant.
Yeah, guys. The last thing is, Akhil, do you have the feedback link?
Yeah, sure. I'll just drop it in the chat right now.
Yeah, guys, like the feedback for the previous workshop was amazing. Thank you so much for the feedback. It really helped us improve our teaching, any new things that we need to put into our teaching. So guys, your feedback would mean the world to us right now. It will really help us for the next workshop as well. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us on Instagram, follow us, we'll follow you back. So you can follow me at I am Harjot Singh, Akhil at Akhil Bodu, and Zaire at Zaire. The last thing I want to point.
Great. Yeah, it's been great connecting with everybody. Like we've seen a lot of people connect with us on Instagram, which has been really sick. So yeah, we're happy to connect with more people. Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah. The last thing I want to mention is that our program deadline is today, tonight. So if you're still interested in our program, which starts on the 1st of November, it's a part-time program, goes on for 3 months with a December break. You basically work in the evenings. We have live classes, workshops. We'll be building 30+ clones like Netflix, Spotify, there's a whole lot of clones. It's going to be so much fun. Yeah, the deadline is tonight. So if you're still interested, either pop us a message on Instagram, or you can go directly to Zaire.io and apply for our program. And there's a cool thing for you guys. There's a £200 off using DSCWD200 coupon code.
Awesome. Great. So I guess if questions, it's been good, guys. Thank you so much for attending the workshop. If you're checking out the recording after the session, please give us feedback. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one where we'll wrap up the Netflix landing page. You'll get to add this to your portfolio and it should be super epic. Awesome.
Yay. Awesome, guys.